Okay, today we're going to talk about stress. So, this is something that's come up again and again recently. And what really, I guess, crystallises it is just talking with a lovely lady last week, just someone who I met by chance having a coffee somewhere, who started talking about how at a certain time in her life, I think she would have linked it to menopause, to where she gained a lot of weight, was going through a very stressful period in her life just through her work. And what happened, without maybe going into too much specific detail, was stress that she'd been able to cope with ordinarily before suddenly seemed too much to bear. So she was very experienced. She'd worked in a job for a long time, but there was a problem with someone that she worked with. It became a very difficult relationship, and it really got out of hand to the point that it affected her life and quality of life and her happiness so much that she ended up changing jobs. So it did force her to take quite drastic action. And this isn't an uncommon scenario, actually, where we get to a point where we feel like the things that we used to be able to cope with, we really can't cope with anymore. And that's certainly my experience as well, actually. And my last job when I was employed was really sort of found that I couldn't cope with the stress. And at the time, I don't think I realised that it was a hormonal problem or that my capacity for dealing with stress was changing. But now when I look back, I really think that it was, it did have something to do with it. And I've always worked, like many people, what job's not stressful these days? All work's stressful, they want more out of you. There's always pressure, there's more to do, it just piles on and on and on. And I'd certainly got to a point within my situation where I was dreading coming to work so much, and that had never happened to me in my life. I'd always made a decision that I was going to enjoy my jobs and I was only going to do jobs that I loved and enjoyed, and I'd managed to do that just about over a 30-year career, which is pretty good going, but found that I was dreading the minute I stepped out of my house to go to work. The noise of traffic and even traffic in the distance was actually painful to my ears. My brain was so fried, and the sort of feeling of dread was so intense that it was actually affecting my physical senses. And every day I would be dreading what would happen next, what people would be asking me to do, what more pressure I was going to be under, what fires I had to put out. I always had a lot of people coming and complaining to me at work, and I literally went through 8 hours a day with a procession of people coming up to me sort of talking about why they were struggling at work, and it just became far too much. What's not untypical either, I would have been around 48 at the time, and my dad got diagnosed with cancer. So on top of feeling all this stress and pressure from work, I then found out that my dad was given less than a year to live, and you're trying to deal with that at work as well. And it just became an intolerable situation. It ultimately culminated in me being fired from my job. I hadn't been there for very long, maybe about 6 months. My boss, who was much younger than me, must have picked up on my, struggles, and maybe saw it as me having a bad attitude. I'll never know because she didn't go into details. But I was clearly just finding it harder and harder, and I was pushing back more and more at work because I was struggling so much, and I just didn't want to take everything on and be the answer to everyone's problems all the time. And eventually when it got to the point where I knew about my dad's situation and I was starting to break down at work and cry, I have never done that ever. I've always prided myself on being able to cope with a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden I was literally breaking down in tears. Even, at the beginning it was in secret when no one was around, and then there was a couple of times where I literally broke down in front of a couple of people that I worked with, which I was mortified, but I just felt like I had no control over it anymore. And sort of got to that point when I then said, look, I need to have some help. I'm really struggling. And, my dad's had this terminal cancer diagnosis and I can't cope with my work anymore. I just need a little bit of support from the team. And 4 hours later, I was in an office with HR being told that things weren't working out and they were going to let me go. And that's a stress at work story. So, I'm smiling now, I'm laughing, things work out, was not nice at the time, I can tell you that. But just really wanted to raise the awareness and raise people's consciousness that stress in menopause is a real thing. Now, I thought I wasn't even in menopause. I think I'm a bit of a Peter Pan person, and I was miles off, and that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't having hot sweats, I wasn't having trouble sleeping. So all of those things that you typically associate with menopause weren't happening to me. Okay, so I was just in denial that anything was going wrong. Never for 1 minute sort of equated my lack of ability to cope and sort of, feel the effects and the physical effects of stress a lot more acutely than I ever had been able to. I didn't equate that with menopause. And once you start having a conversation about something, you then start to find that people share similar experiences and have similar stories. And that's certainly what I've discovered over the past couple of months, really, as I say, culminating in that story with the girl I met last week, who'd found that, really had a problem with, saw her body change quite a lot in that time as well. And that's not uncommon. There can be a trigger, there can be a set of circumstances that happen to you where it almost becomes a bit of a pivotal time in your life that you then recognise that affects, how you feel mentally. It affects other aspects of your health, and ultimately your weight can be an expression of your health as well. And, stress can cause problems with sleep, which is linked to overeating, it's linked to eating more junk food, it's linked to increasing levels of stress hormones and cortisol in your system, which in it also contributes to weight gain, particularly abdominal fat. So stress is really quite vicious in that respect, in terms of the effect it can have on our bodies. People also find that when they're feeling stressed, they don't have motivation, you can't be bothered, you might, look for food for comfort, you might eat to distract yourself from how you're feeling or to rebel against how you're feeling actually. There can be lots of reasons you feel like you don't care anymore. So you can be eating in spite of yourself or to spite yourself or as a punishment because you're just so frustrated with the whole situation. So it can really trigger a huge cascade of eating habits and eating patterns, as well as all these hormonal changes that are going on that are affecting your body fat. That the combined effect of those can be quite a big change to a woman's body. And when you're going through such a turbulent time anyway, it's particularly cruel that you then start to see and experience these changes as well. Okay, doesn't help with your self-confidence or your self-esteem, or even the feelings that you're in control of your own life anymore. Not only can you not control your emotions and how you react to things, but now you can't control what's happening to your body either. And that can start to become a very difficult and unpleasant time. Okay, so purpose of just wanting to raise that today is as much to say, be aware that struggling with stress and finding yourself unable to cope with difficult things as much as you used to be able to is a very typical part of this life stage. Okay, and that is a beginning, is to actually sort of cultivate that awareness of it. In terms of if it's affecting your career, very much depends on your company and the people that you work with and what sort of support that they actually have in place to actually help you and support you through those times. My experience was 2 years ago. Clearly that company had no support or interest in that area. You were just seen as a bit of a hassle and therefore best dispatched quickly before you became even more hard work than you were already. But you'll have to gauge your own company, to decide whether or not that you actually come clean or look for some support within your organisation to help you get through that time. Okay, that may be there, that may not be there. Also, outside of that, then if you're not going to feel like you're going to get the support from your company, then it's important to try and get some support at home, and maybe speak to a significant other, close friends, a GP, and start to just let these sounds or let this awareness or let your voice be heard, and say these things out loud and start to acknowledge that this is how you feel. And even just acknowledging that can be an incredible help, an incredible release. You'll be surprised really how much support you get. People tend to want to help. I would imagine that most people would have a more sympathetic response at work than my own experience. I certainly know people who have spoken to colleagues about it and found that, that a lot of colleagues feel in a similar position as well. It's very common for us to have people who are going through the same situations. Work can be stressful for many reasons, and just by having yourself heard and someone to say, okay, I understand, can lift a huge weight off your shoulders. You're not carrying all the burden of that worry of how you're feeling in your own head anymore, and that can be a very important release. So, and things that you can then do to sort of help, if you feel like things are out of control, I really would support or recommend that you went and spoke to a GP and just really try and get a good handle on what support you can have, how you're feeling, how it's manifesting itself. But then things that you can do from your own perspective are, exercise is a fantastic one. A lot of people are put off exercise because we think exercise is something that you have to do to burn calories or lose weight. And I think the more we can let go of that idea, the better, because exercise is something, or moving is something that can have such a powerful transformative effect on your mental health. It can just give your mind a break. You can go for a walk when you've got all these thoughts swirling through your brain, and you can just suddenly find a bit of a breakthrough while you're out walking and start to switch off, get distracted, enjoy the environment, the outside, and start to feel some of those feel-good hormones kicking in that are going to lift your mood and leave you feeling in a better place than when you started. So exercise can be a real breakthrough thing. So think about exercise as something for your sanity, for your mental health, more than anything else. Okay, so that can be very positive. Anything that can help you switch your brain off, again, is important. And I think about these things as stress balancing activities. Now, women can have very, very overactive brains. So the idea of actually being able to switch off can be very easy to say. I'm smiling because I can relate to this so much, but actually very difficult to do. So it can take some practice and it can take some perseverance. But it could be something where you're finding a hobby. People do colouring in or knitting or painting, reading, crosswords, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter, but things that you can lose yourself in. So you're just focusing on that thing and that you're doing and not really thinking about anything else and just giving your mind a break. And the more you can actually give your mind a break, you can start to get a little bit more control over your thoughts and start to become more familiar with your thinking patterns as well, because often a lot of the stuff that's going and turning over on a loop in your brain is useless. It's not helpful, it's not getting you anywhere. So the more you can start to dial that down, the more you can start to give your brain a little bit of a rest and a little bit of space. And that's going to really be very helpful in terms of you starting to feel like you're getting control of your mind, getting control of stress. So that's something to think of. Meditation is a good thing for that as well. Again, starting to quieten your brain, observe your thoughts, start to become aware about those thinking patterns that you've created, and start to be able to change them so that they become less destructive. Okay, and then finally, the last thing to say about how to sort of help with the stress is, food can have an impact. What you eat can actually make you feel better. If you have got a very low quality diet in terms of the amount of nutrition that you've got, then that can actually influence or affect brain chemistry. So see if you can find the motivation, to help you feel better in yourself. Use that as motivation to help you make decisions to make more nutritious food, because surprisingly that can actually help as well, which you wouldn't actually always think about. That can be, again, I'm not suggesting that's an easy thing, especially if you're using food an awful lot to boost your mood or for pleasure or rebellion, as we talked about. But just be aware and be mindful that food can actually be something that actually supports your body and your overall well-being, and that can actually make a difference. Okay, so there are 3 things that you can think about that can actually help with stress. But a big step is to actually acknowledge that what you're feeling is normal, in the sense that it's not atypical for women going through the menopause to really struggle with stress, but it's also something that you shouldn't have to deal with on your own, and that you should be able to get some support from externally, but also make some sort of subtle lifestyle changes to actually help you get a little bit more control over your mental health and start to feel better in yourself as well. Okay, so I hope that helps. I'll see you again soon, and drop me a line in the comments if you have any questions about that or things that you would like me to touch on future videos. If you do, I do have a book which is Why Women Over 40 Don't Lose Weight. It talks about a lot of these problems. It's not really about just weight loss, it's a lot more about the things that happen in our lives, and the busyness and the stress that women experience that actually means that we neglect ourselves and what we need. Within that book there are links to Facebook groups that you have as a resource, so it would be lovely if you bought the book and joined me in one of those Facebook groups as well. Okay, right, I will leave you there. See you soon.